Well, hello, everyone. Phil here from the Blue Envelope channel. So, I think there's a general axiom among ex Jehovah's Witnesses and ex Mormons and ex anything really that you shouldn't do a full frontal assault on people's beliefs that are in the group still because it's super unsuccessful. They tend to just dig their heels in, and you get that backfire effect where they're even more resistant to leaving. And I'm guessing most all of us here can relate to that both as witnesses and as ex witnesses. As witnesses, we've probably had people come at us like that, trying to forcibly deconvert us. And I'm pretty sure it was unsuccessful 100% of the time. And then as ex witnesses, I think a lot of us, when we were waking up, tried to do this knowledge dump on our friends and family to forcibly deconvert them. And again, super unsuccessful. Do not recommend. Now, all that said, I think there is another thing that's true, which is that most of us, when we were witnesses, had the experience where we would be talking to some non-witness, some worldly person, as witnesses call non-witnesses, and they would say something, and your brain kind of goes, huh, it makes sense what they're saying, but also it doesn't fit in with the Jehovah's Witness belief system. And you don't really know what to do with that. And so I think most of us just kind of take it and file it in a file cabinet in the very back of our brain. And it just sits there. It doesn't do anything. It doesn't make you go, oh, I got to get out of this false religion. It's just there. And most of us kind of gradually stack those up little by little over the years. And eventually there's a point where you leave the religion. So I thought I would just talk about a few of the people, worldly people, that made me think as a witness, so that I could think of 6 of them that happened over the years. So these are roughly in chronological order. So the first guy was a guy named Michael Murphy. And this was a fellow my dad was studying with. A very interesting guy. He was an ex-mercenary. So he'd been in the military, and then he'd gone into kind of like a soldier for hire situation, I guess. I can remember I must have, I don't know, been 8 or 9 years old, but we'd go over to his house for the study, and he had this one room with a huge knife collection in it. And I remember I just loved going into that room and just looking at all the knives on display. But he was a very, so this would have been like the late 80s, and a very average, normal guy. I think a lot of the folks studying with witnesses or Mormons or whoever nowadays maybe have some like mental health issues or cognitive issues. There's something that they're getting from their religion. But back in the late 80s, way before the internet, you would get just average, normal people converting to the witnesses. And that's what he was. He had, nice house, nice car and everything. Now, obviously, thinking back now, I'm sure he had a lot of PTSD and, stuff he had feelings about that he'd done during his time working. But for me as a little kid, it just seemed like a very nice, normal guy. And but ultimately, he never progressed. He didn't start going to the meetings or anything like that. And so eventually, he ended the study. And I can remember one of our last visits, he kind of basically said, "Hey, listen, the minute I see anything prophesied, talked about by Jehovah's Witnesses about the last days coming true, I'm going to beat feet to the door of the Kingdom Hall." And of course, my dad kind of, went on about, well, the door of the ark closed before the rain started, so that would be too late to do that and that kind of thing. But I can just remember that kind of didn't make sense in my head of, wait, here's a normal, smart guy, and yet he's not joining our religion. That doesn't make sense. And so that just kind of stuck with me. All right, the second one, my own grandma, Grandma Nancy. So I had 2 grandmas that were alive, and the one, my dad's mom, when they converted to the witnesses, she was very hardcore. She shunned them for a few years after they converted, very witness-like. But then my mom's mom, Grandma Nancy, she was very, just kind of went with the flow. Like if her daughter and son-in-law are joining this wacky religion, well, whatever. She was always very accepting and kind to us. And she was kind of nominally religious, Greek Orthodox, Russian Orthodox, something like that. Didn't go to church every Sunday or anything. yeah, that just kind of stuck with me because I could see the contrast. Even my other grandma, she would still get into big arguments with my parents when we go over to her house. Whereas my other grandma, Nancy, she was just very kind. That impressed me as her being a worldly person and still being a good person. Number three was a doctor, like a retired physician that I did yard work for as I got a little older. And he had a big old house and big yard that needed, mowing and raking and things like that. So we would talk a little bit now and then. And I can remember, it came up that I was a witness. He said, I've always thought about it as each religion is a ladder going up to heaven. And once you climb your ladder and you poke your head through the clouds and you see all the other ladders ending up there too. And everybody's like, hey, what are you doing here? So that was his point that, all religions have some good in them and it doesn't really matter what you belong to because they're all going to go to the same place. And that just stuck with me as a young witness kid thinking, oh, that's a new concept that some people think it doesn't matter what religion you belong to. Number four was a lady named Cynthia that a few years later I was working at a bicycle ski shop, and she worked there while she was in grad school. She went on to become a reference librarian. As we all know, reference librarians are the coolest people on earth. And but she was very jokey, and she would kind of give me the business now and then. And I can remember at one point she was wearing a cross necklace, and it came up that about how witnesses don't use the cross. And she was kind of like, well, what the heck's up with that if you're a Christian? And on that question, I was like super prepared. I'd read the reasoning book and I just gave the textbook answer about, well, the cross is what killed Jesus. And would you wear, like if my sister got shot and killed by a gun, would I make a little golden gun and hang it on a necklace and wear it around my neck? I can just remember she didn't really say much of anything. It's just like, huh, and walked away. And that was the end of it. But I just remember being a little confused about, well, that's the answer. That's the perfect answer. Why aren't you agreeing with me and saying, oh, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. That's got to be true. Number five was another person I worked with at that shop. His name was Bill. He was my boss and very jocular. We don't use that word very much. Very jocular guy, very talkative. He had a kind of a big gut and laughed a lot. And so he, knew I was a witness. And anyway, at one point he was asking more about witness beliefs and what they were. And I thought, well, let me bring in something that you can read. So at that time we were using the knowledge book and the required brochure. And I said, this guy, he's a smart guy. So I said, let's skip all that superficial stuff that we give to the public. And I brought him in a reasoning book, reasoning from the scriptures. Now that is not at all a book designed for public consumption. That is strictly an internal book just for witnesses' use. And it lays out all the, how to overcome objections and all the bare bones talking points about why what we believe is true. I just had so much respect for his intelligence and thinking ability. Like this, let's skip all the fluff. Let's get right to the nitty gritty. So I brought that into him, gave it to him, and then a few days later he returned it to me. And he didn't really say anything. He just gave it back to me. And I was so confused, so flummoxed by that reaction because he's a smart guy. And here's all the doctrines of Jehovah's Witnesses laid out very clearly in black and white. And I just could not understand why he didn't react like, oh, this is amazing. How do I, like the jailer with the Apostle Paul falling at my feet and saying, sir, what must I do to get saved? And there's nothing like that. So that always stuck with me, that experience. Number six was one of my teachers in college and nursing school. And she was only a few years older than me. It took a long time before I felt comfortable enough to even go maybe to a community college and get an associate degree. So I was in my late 20s. She was in maybe her early 30s. At some point in the curriculum, we were talking about how witnesses don't take blood transfusions. And I think she knew that I was a witness, and so mentioned something about that. And I said, well, let me bring in something that kind of explains it more from the witness perspective. So there's hospital liaison committees that the society has, but then there's also like a subcommittee called hospital visitation committees. I don't know if they still exist or not. And anyway, my dad was on the hospital visitation committee in our area. And so there was a packet available to elders that they could use with healthcare providers. And so my instructor was a nurse practitioner. So I went and got the old VHS cassette, and it was a video I don't think was even available like to witnesses in general, but it was designed for physicians and explained the beliefs about blood transfusions. And there was like a folder prepared and a packet with different studies and journal articles in there reprinted. So again, it was that kind of thing. Like I had a lot of respect for her intelligence, and I was like, let's skip all the blood brochure, the fluffy stuff that the public can get. And this is like the hardcore information. So I gave all that to her, and kind of the same deal, a little next week or whatever, she returned it back to me. And again, like zero reaction, just thank you. I just could not understand why she wasn't like, oh yeah, that makes so much sense. Thank you. Can I learn more? Blah, blah, blah. It just didn't compute why a smart person wasn't accepting these religious beliefs. Number 7 was a fellow householder in service. And he must have been someone in a Christian church that they had gone over like how to refute witnesses in their doctrines. And so he was talking about 1914 and 607 versus 587 when Jerusalem fell, and how the chronology didn't work. I can remember for some reason there were 3 of us at the door, which I feel bad about now, having that feels like it'd be intimidating 3-on-1. But anyways, he was arguing this point that witnesses were wrong about the chronology. I can remember kind of zoning out at the door and letting the other 2 argue with him. And I was just kind of thinking about what he was saying, that, well, yeah, I guess 1914, it's kind of a nothing year. It's not in the Bible at all. The whole point is, when did Jerusalem fall? And then you build off that, the 2,520 years to get to 1914. And so ultimately, it's a matter of like, how much do you trust the society that Jerusalem fell in 607 versus 587? And the next question that I didn't ask myself, wasn't ready to ask myself at that time, was, well, do I trust the organization that much that's the right year, whatever year they say it is? So that encounter definitely stuck with me. So those are the times I can remember that worldly people made me think as a witness. And it's kind of interesting, except I guess for that last guy arguing about 607, none of them were argumentative encounters. Nobody was slamming my faith. They were all very respectful. The general reaction was just, interesting. But even just that, such a mild reaction, was so not what I had been told to expect as far as a reaction when somebody's shown the quote unquote truth from the witnesses, that it just lodged in my brain and never forgot about it. And again, none of these were like times that I said, oh my goodness, I'm in a false religion, I need to flee from her. But they just kind of lodged in the back of my mind, and were some of the factors that years later combined with other factors to ultimately have me leave the religion. So I guess that's a good lesson for us as ex-witnesses. Really all it takes is to maybe point out something that doesn't make sense to a witness, and then just say, interesting. And don't push it any further, and just let the witness's own mind percolate from that point and do the work to maybe eventually get to the point of, oh yeah, that doesn't make sense. Let me look into this more. So those were my experiences. I'd be curious to hear in the comments, did you ever have experiences like that where worldly people kind of made you go, even as a very active believing witness? So let us know below. Subscribe if you like to for more videos, and we'll catch y'all in the next one. Take care.